Chair Lilligren is not with us today, so you're stuck. My apologies. There aren't any changes to the agenda. We'll approve it. Anybody? Very good. We've got an approved agenda. Approval of the April 17th, 2023 CDC meeting minutes.
I would move the minutes as presented.
Okay, Councilmember Wolf moves.
Second.
Councilmember Lindstrom seconds. Because Jenna isn't able to be with us today, she is with us virtually and she's taking minutes virtually. So I will remind me to add names when we do motions and seconds and all that kind of stuff. So all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. And moving on to consent business, we have one consent business item, 2023 City of Bloomington Industrial Land Use Description Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. And you'll want to say motion by Carter and second by Wolf.
Oh, yeah. Motion by Carter, second by Wolf. See, I say it and then I don't do it. Oh, Wendy, I'm glad you're here. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Moving on, we have no non-consent business items. So next we have in the information area, number 1, Metro HRA Business Unit Update from Terri Smith.
Hello, Madam Chair and council members. This is kind of a catch-all item for you today, but for the record, I'm Terri Smith and I'm the Director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And we had several updates we wanted to bring to you today on work that's been happening in the HRA and that's upcoming. So we named it Metro HRA Update. So I'll be covering a couple of different categories. So for starters, just a reminder that our mission is to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing opportunities to encourage housing choice throughout the region, including areas of high opportunity, and to foster family stability and promote self-sufficiency for people with low wealth. So as we're doing our work in the Housing Authority, this is sort of our grounding for what we do each day. I have a slide of quick facts here about the Housing Authority. We provide rent assistance to about 7,200 families in the region through 9 different rent assistance programs. The map at our right, I think, is always a helpful reminder of our service area in the region because the council serves a broader region than the Housing Authority here, but the Housing Authority serves the areas in yellow. So all of Anoka County, all of Carver County, and then suburban Hennepin and Ramsey. The housing authorities outlined in other colors up there have their own rent assistance programs, so they're not inclusive of our service area. We distribute about $77 million each year in rent payments to 1,800 active landlords. So this is sort of our first topic. Each year we have to submit a report card to our federal partners, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it's called the Section 8 Management Assessment Program. And this is really HUD's tool for measuring our performance and housing authority performance all across the country. We're rated on 14 key indicators under this program, like do we calculate rent accurately? Do we complete our recertifications on time? Do we do our inspections on time? Do we correct health and safety violations within a 24 period as required? Do we spend all of our money that the feds give us? Do we issue as many vouchers as we can with the money? So there's 14 indicators, and I'm excited to report to you that we've received the highest rating as high performer again for 2022, and that's our 19th straight year. So we're excited about it. It doesn't come easily, but it's really a credit to the HRA staff that do our very tedious and technical work every day. So thanks to the HRA staff that are out there listening today. In 2022, I think it's helpful for you to know how we did in using our vouchers and spending our money. So that's what this slide is about. We achieved 99.7% utilization of vouchers. So that means we're close to 100%. If you round it up, it's 100%. So we're excited about that. And I would say in the last couple of years and in 2022 as well, it was difficult for families to place their vouchers because of the pandemic and the challenges that are continuing here in our region. But we're happy to report that we utilized almost all of our vouchers. And we spent 100% of our money. So the feds give us money and expect us to spend it, and we did just that. So we spent $78 million on subsidy payments to private landlords. And we put 1.5 million into reserves. They're called HUD-held reserves. So, and that money is available to us in 2023 to spend, so adding to our 2023 budget. We also received 2 million in set-aside funds from HUD in 2023, and that stems from in the very beginning of the year when we knew our average costs were going way up. We applied for some additional funding. It ended up at the end of the year, we didn't need it, but we were real close, and now we have that money available to us to spend in 2023 if we need it. If we don't need it, they have a choice to either pull it back or carry it over into another year. So it's a nice cushion for us to make sure that we can serve all of our families this year. What I will also say is our 2023 budget authority is better than we've seen in recent years. And so we're excited to get over $80 million from the feds this year. And so that will be enough to serve all of our voucher holders this year, which hasn't been the case in recent years, so with the exception of 2022. And then we filled 852 turnover vouchers. So that's the number of vouchers that turned over in our program year. And those slots need to be refilled in one of many ways. And so 218 of those slots went to waiting list admissions. So those are the applicants that are on our waiting list waiting for a voucher. 158 went to project-based voucher admissions. So those are project-based voucher units that either came online during 2022 or turned over. So we filled those units. We gave 76 vouchers to people that were moving out of project-based voucher units. So once a voucher holder lives in a project-based unit for 12 months, they have a choice to request a tenant-based voucher to move to a location of their choice. So 76 vouchers went to that population, and then we absorbed 400 vouchers. And yeah.
Everybody knows what that means, except me.
Absorbing a voucher? Madam Chair, I was going to ask, could you go into detail on that too?
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair and Council Member, you took the words out of my mouth, but the absorbing a voucher, so once a family has a voucher, they can go anywhere they want in the region, in the state, in the country that has a housing authority administering the voucher. And so maybe somebody gets their voucher from Minneapolis PHA, they move to Metro HRA service area. When they arrive to us, we can either absorb them into our own program or we can bill Minneapolis for that voucher. And we don't ever want to bill because then if we absorb it, it takes one of our vouchers, one of our turnover vouchers. If we bill them, it continues to be owned by Minneapolis. But we have to absorb some because it's a billing nightmare. There's 1,800 people working through portability in the Twin Cities, so vouchers living outside of the voucher owner's jurisdiction, and so there's so many billings back and forth that we have to absorb some to relieve some of that billing administrative paperwork. And so we had 400 families that moved to our service area where we absorbed them into our own program.
Yes. Thank you. So if we absorb them, then we own the voucher. I'm assuming then that we have people who are using portability moving out into other areas where they absorb our vouchers. Are we seeing that it pretty much, evens out over time?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Carter, it really fluctuates because we're the largest housing authority in the state. We tend to, I'll use Washington County as an example. We might have 400 people living in Washington County where we own the voucher. And because their program size is so small, they can't absorb them all. And they maybe only have a handful living in our service area. With Minneapolis and St. Paul, because we all have large programs, there's constant flow of people back and forth. Sometimes we have more living there, sometimes they have more living here.
Okay. It works out over time, though. Thank you.
Fascinating. That was a good question. Thank you. Committee Member Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you know how many of ours were absorbed by the other authorities?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wolf, I could look at it. I don't know it off the top of my head.
You don't have to look right now, but
What's
if you...
that? No, I'm gonna write it down so I remember to
Okay.
get back to you. Yeah, so I don't know right now, but it's sporadic, Madam Chair, sorry about that, Councilmember Wolf. When Housing Authority recently got their funding notice and we all got more funding than we've received in years. So now we're getting all kinds of absorbed notices because housing authorities have room in their programs and they have money and so they're absorbing. And we're doing the same. We just absorbed 60 vouchers for the month of May. So when we get our new dollars, it means we can serve more families, and it's like starting the engine again for our programs for the year.
Councilmember Johnson.
So I think all my questions were answered, but I have one. So just so I am really clear, so when there's more money, that means that, I mean, it's all about people moving out of one HRA boundary into another? Okay, so what would happen if that money didn't come in? People are stuck, there's nowhere to go, or they move? I mean, you know what I mean? Because do they have to check with their local HRA that they're working with, or can they be looking outside of that jurisdiction into other areas without the HRA being notified?
So Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, the initial housing authority, the one that owns the voucher, has to approve them to move somewhere else. So if we have a voucher holder that wants to move to Minneapolis or Ohio for that matter, they come to us and say, I want to move to Ohio, or I want to move to Minneapolis. We make sure they're in good standings, don't owe money, those sorts of things, which, you know, doesn't happen very often. And then we send their file to Minneapolis and they administer it.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, just one more note on that. If, when housing authorities are running out of money, they can deny portability to a higher cost area. So if they don't have the money to let them port, like you think of outstate Minnesota, their rents are a lot lower than they are here in the metro area. So if there's an outstate housing authority that has low rents and someone wants to port, that housing authority can get HUD approval to deny moving to a higher cost area because it'll cost more money and they don't have the money.
Councilmember Dalkar, and then Councilmember Carter and Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. How long is the waiting list to get on the waiting list? And then how long does it take from the waiting list to get into the voucher program?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Dolker, a long time. So we opened our waiting list the last time in 2019, no, 2022. 2022. 2019 before that, and then 2022. We got 11,000 application requests in a week, and we were only able to place 2,000 on the waiting list through a random drawing. And the reason we do that is because we need to be working from a current waiting list, or we don't have success in reaching people. So our goal is to have a 2 or 3 year list, and then those 9,000 people that didn't make the lottery drawing have to reapply when a housing authority reopens again.
Yes.
This is for my own educational purposes. Is the voucher a combination of federal, state, metro dollars, or is it just purely federal dollars? I'm seeing head nods.
Madam Chair and Council Member, it's federal. It's a federal Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8. Okay. And the federal rules don't allow us to supplant the funding with local funds. So we can't commingle local funds in with the federal funding.
Okay.
Councilmember Carter, and then Councilmember Johnson and Councilmember Lindstrom.
So
If I'm missing anybody, wave, really.
I clearly need a lesson on vouchers, and I'm not going to try to get it all here, but thank you for tolerating one more question. You did say that you prefer to have a large waiting list and to work from a waiting list over time. I don't know if you said you prefer to have a large waiting list, but the example that you gave of being able to place 2,000 people on the waiting list, I'm wondering, what is the typical waiting list and how long does it take to get through it? Of course, I'm thinking of the person who's on it and waiting to be able to get housing with the voucher.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Carter, it varies, but 2 to 5 years for a voucher once somebody gets placed on the waiting list. But like Minneapolis, PHA has 10,000 people on their waiting list. So that's going to take a whole lot longer than it will for our agency that has less than 2,000 now on our list. But it depends on so many things. Funding, how many people go, when I talk about 852 turnover vouchers, that's how many we had last year for the whole year. And they have to serve all of these purposes. So if we didn't absorb any vouchers, we'd have 400 more that could go to the waiting list, but we'd have billings for 1,500 people or 1,000 people, and we just wouldn't be able to we wouldn't have the capacity to manage that. But it's 2 to 5 years for a voucher once somebody gets on a list. And that's typical all around the country, not only here in our region.
Yep. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson?
Oh, was there?
Councilmember
I didn't-
Lindstrom. Oh,
Councilmember
did you have
Carter?
another one, Councilmember Carter? Did you have
No,
another?
I'm
Oh,
good.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Terri, how does this, so I'm assuming that the dollars that we are, the additional money we're getting from the feds, including the 2 million of set aside that we're moving into 2023, that was all factored in to when we changed our policy around the amount of rent assistance that we'll give, meaning we were trying to find that sweet spot between serving more people at lower amounts where they might not be successful at landing their vouchers to serving less people that could not only land a voucher, but raise that rent assistance so that they could land something maybe in an area that is more desirable for them, whatever that means. So did all of this additional money, that was all calculated into those decisions that we were looking at as a body and then finally adopting?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, this particular money wasn't factored in at that time because we didn't know we were going to get this money then.
Okay.
But where it does factor in is you adopted, and one of my slides is on, I'll talk a little bit about the small area fair market rents that you all adopted.
Yep.
That allows people to rent higher rent units in the region, so it opens up new neighborhoods and additional housing options for families, and that costs more money. So as rents continue to rise, this additional money will help us serve all of our families because we know rents are continuing to rise and our costs continue to rise per family. And so it will go further for us.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Terri, for that, because I didn't think it was factored in, and I'm like, okay, is this a bit of a windfall, which maybe, yes, but also I'm not sure it really will allow, I don't know how many more families it will allow because rents are just incredibly high. But anyways, I'll wait till you get to that slide. But, you know, that was one of the things that was triggering me like that. And it's just such a difficult decision. This body makes those decisions with staff's guidance. And it's really hard knowing that people are waiting and waiting and waiting and will never get chosen, end up doing something else, versus the people that finally get their voucher, right? And then they can't place it, or they place it where it might not be where they are near to work or a school that they want their kids to go to or whatever. So this is a hard discussion when you realize how many people are, you know, struggling out there, and it's not getting any easier either for folks.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you. On the they can't place it point, so my recollection is about half of the folks that get a voucher can't find a place that will accept a voucher. Is that roughly correct?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, we're at about 60% success right now. So that means about 60% that get a voucher use it, and 40% come back. But I think it's important to point out that's not just because they can't find housing. People, you know, for example, when waiting lists are open, people apply all over the place, not only here in our region, but in other states, because they're applying to a waiting list where they can get an application, and waiting lists are closed all over the place. So maybe they applied in Ohio, and their name came up on the Ohio list. So then when we select them on our list, they don't respond because they already got their voucher there. It could be that they found other options. So when their name comes up, they maybe didn't respond for one reason or another. Maybe they moved or changed email addresses and we can't reach them. So those are all also reasons why the vouchers come back to us, not just because they can't find a place. But I think it's fair to say in this market, there are a number of people that have a difficult time finding a place with their voucher.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it be possible to get information on who actually tried to find a place with a voucher and couldn't versus people whose name came up and never responded? Because that would be helpful information. And also whether it's getting better since we increased the rents limits, or if it's the same or hopefully not worse, but.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Wolf, we track some of that information, but not all of it. So we know when someone's issued a voucher and it expires, for example. So that's about 40%. But we don't know why it expires. Because, you know, unless we hear anecdotally from a family, I couldn't find a unit or a landlord that would accept my voucher. I couldn't find a unit. But oftentimes people just disappear for one reason or another and we don't know why. So it could be So we know how many expire, we just don't know why they expire in many cases. And so what we started doing during the pandemic is reaching out to people, our outreach team, whose vouchers were about to expire in the next 60 days. How's it going? Are you having trouble finding a unit? Can we help you? What barriers are you facing? What can we do to help your search be successful? And it, we had money for security deposits and application fees and some of those sorts of things. Excuse me. And so it's a long way of saying we don't really know exactly how many.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That 400 voucher absorbs thing is fascinating to me because there are people then who are finding landlords, but they're just coming from other parts of the metro or other parts of the state or other states with their vouchers. So at least those 400 people were able to find housing with their vouchers, just not necessarily our people from our list. But it does really show how much pressure there is from all of the different sources seeking those units, that we could only bring in 218 people off of the waiting list and 476 coming from other sources.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wolf, you're right on. We get about 50 port-ins a month, so 50 people a month come here from other areas. They don't all lease up, but 50 arrive here. So.
Other questions? Okay.
Okay, so here are some of the things you've done in the last 4 years during your administration, and Council Members Carter and Dolker, here are some of you will have some impact on some of these things later this year. So some policy decisions that you've all made was the adoption of small area fair market rents. And what that means is the feds issue fair market rents, and then housing authorities are charged with adopting rent limits within a certain range of that. And generally HUD issues fair market rents for an entire metropolitan area. Housing authorities have the discretion to adopt what's called small area fair market rents, and that's rent limits by zip code. And our service area has more than 120 zip codes, and this council adopted small area fair market rents in 2020 that because they're higher rent limits in higher rent portions of the region than lower rent limits in lower rent areas of the region, it, number one, sort of balances things out, but number two, opens up neighborhoods in areas where voucher holders have maybe been historically excluded from. And we did some research on this, and I'll really dig into this fall when I come to you with small area fair market rents, but the adoption of small area fair market rents increased the number of units with eligible rents by 14% as compared to the traditional method of calculation. So we know that it's benefiting people, and we're tracking where people are moving, so I'll share more detail on that when I come before you again this fall. The second item there, we were awarded a community choice demonstration grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in conjunction with Minneapolis Public Housing. And that's a mobility demonstration program that just launched in September of 2022, but it's working with voucher holders and moving to low poverty areas of the region. So it's geared towards families with children, and again, helping them access neighborhoods where they have historically been excluded from, and it's for families that want to make a move. Not all families want to move to a low poverty area, and which is why we also have place-based initiatives to allow. Our goal is to help families with upward mobility regardless of where they choose to live. But this particular program is a formal research study that analyzes which supports may be most successful in helping families move to new neighborhoods and achieve success once there. So we're excited to bring you along on that project. We have a information item that'll be coming before you this fall to share the progress on that program. We've offered and awarded 116 vouchers in the last 4 years, 116 project-based vouchers, excuse me. And there will be more coming online in the next year. So that was based on your policy decisions to make those awards. In terms of place-based initiatives, I talked about our upward mobility sort of umbrella that we have in the way we think in the housing authorities. We want to have initiatives that meet families where they are and help them succeed in high poverty, low poverty areas, any part in the region where they want to live. because we know that opportunity means different things to each family. And so these are recent initiatives in the last 2 years that you've adopted policies on. And one is Homework Starts with Home, and that's a partnership with suburban Ramsey County schools and Solid Ground to assist families experiencing homelessness and their families to achieve housing stability so the kids can remain in the same school and achieve success. You adopted a move-up preference, and this is a preference for 40 vouchers that are provided to families and individuals that are living in permanent supportive housing. They no longer need the supports, and so we give them a voucher so they can move up from that program, and that opens a permanent supportive housing for a new person who does need the supports. The bottom box there are all new programs within the last 2 years at the Housing Authority. Actually, Mainstream, we got our first allocation in 2018, but we have 218 Mainstream vouchers, and that you may recall, and for Councilmember Carter and Dolker, we have a partnership with the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team to provide vouchers and links to services for people that are experiencing homelessness and temporary sheltering on the transit system or transit platforms, light rail lines, things like that. We received 218 emergency vouchers during the pandemic, so in 2021, and those are brand new vouchers. The exciting thing about those is they also serve people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, but these are the first vouchers in the history of these programs that came with support. So we got service fees, we got dollars to spend on security deposits, application fees, and those sorts of things, which was great, and we're using them, so we hope to show HUD that these things work, give us more money so we can continue to provide those things.
Oh, sorry. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you.
Paying attention, I forget to pay attention.
It's really good to hear about the innovative work that's being done here. I wanted to ask about the Mainstream vouchers that you mentioned in the blue area down below, and to find out whether you'll be coming back to let us know soon what the experience with those vouchers has been. You mentioned the focus on transit and people who may be sheltering on transit. And it just, there's a disconnect in my mind between those folks who need immediate shelter and what the voucher does, which takes so long, and whether there's some connection then working with housing providers in the interim, if these vouchers go to those providers and not to the individuals. I've got a lot of those questions and wonder when we'll hear more, or if I should separately investigate that with you.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Carter, ironically, there was a presentation with the Homeless Action Team, the Metro Transit Homeless Action Team, and the Metro HRA Outreach Team. I think it was the first committee of the whole in March. So right before you started, I'm going to send you a link to that presentation because it covered exactly what you're talking about and the challenge that are faced on both ends. And I think what I'll do also is maybe set up a briefing separately. And Councilmember Dolker, if you're interested too, just about the Housing Authority work and just answer questions and provide a deeper dive for you both if you'd like that.
I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Great question. Terri, if you could send that link to all of the new council members, I think it would be beneficial for all of them to get to see that, because that presentation was really remarkable. It was very well organized and presented and inspiring.
Excellent.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And it was a public meeting, so it was taped. So to get the context, I think would be good too, just if you have time to watch that meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so, excuse me, Foster Youth to Independence vouchers, that's a brand new HUD program. So if there's something exciting coming out of the feds, these are all brand new programs that we didn't have before 2018, and 2 of them are brand new in the last, year and a half. And so the feds are investing more in voucher programs. We'd like to see more general purpose vouchers, but these serve specialized populations that there's a need for that too. And so the Foster Youth to Independence vouchers are, we have partnerships with the public child welfare agencies in Hennepin, Anoka, and Carver counties. And this is a brand new program. We just have 11 of those vouchers right now, and we have that young people are just starting to lease up with those vouchers, and we can get more. So this one works a little bit differently in that when there's a need identified, we send an email to HUD and ask for another voucher, and they'll give us another one. So the counties have to identify the need first, and it has to be connected to a person before we get the voucher. So we're just getting in our groove with the counties on this program and hope to, grow that program.
Councilmember Carter.
2 additional counties as well, and areas.
Councilmember Vento, the only other county we could partner with would be Ramsey, and we had reached out to them initially when this program came out, and for whatever reason, they didn't have the capacity at that time, but certainly we could reach out to them again.
Oh, let's do, thank you.
And then the Edina Affordable Housing Partnership is fresh in the current, or the, previous council members' minds, but we have a new partnership with the city of Edina. We had a 25-year forgivable loan for $2 million that allowed us to go out and buy 4 additional housing units in the city of Edina. The city didn't have the infrastructure in place to own and operate housing. We did, so we entered into this loan agreement, and we now own 4 additional units. So it's a start. It'd be nice to replicate that program in other parts of the region, so we'll see where that goes.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilmember Johnson.
And just a quick question, and if you touched on it and I missed it, I'm sorry. How are we doing on our veterans vouchers?
Councilmember Vento, Chair Vento, Councilmember Johnson, we just got 30 more January 1st. And so we're waiting to get a bunch more referrals from the VA. We do have some referrals, but we need more. And that's a program, they're high barrier veterans, sometimes are hard to house, come with high barriers. So we do as much housing search assistance in partnership with the VA to help them get leased up, but we just got 30 more. So we're hoping to issue those. And the feds just offered more veterans vouchers. The notice came out, a couple of months ago, but they indicated in the notice that if you received the award in January, you can't apply for them. Well, they must not have gotten much interest from a national perspective because they just reissued that notice on Friday again that says, oh, scratch that, you can still apply for more. But it's not likely that we will apply for any more at this point because the VA needs to have capacity to get us the referrals, and they don't have that. So we'll certainly apply again in the future.
Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Terri. I want to commend the staff for the foresight and vision in partnering with Edina, and I hope that in the future it'll have really good results so that we can brag about it and get more cities to kind of come on board and continue this partnership.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Councilmember Lee, thank you for that. We did meet with the city of Minnetonka initially, and we've had some discussions with them about some housing that they own, but if anything comes of that, we'll certainly bring that to you and share with you.
Great.
So on to the Family Affordable Housing Program units. So the council owns 154 units of housing under the broader voucher program. Tenants are renting from a private landlord, which is not the council. These are under the council's project-based voucher program. This program was established in 1999, and we went out on the open housing market during 2001 to 2004 and purchased 150 scattered site units of housing. They were funded, HUD grants funded the purchase of those units, and they were developed as a result of the Holman consent decree, which was the outcome of a class action lawsuit in Minneapolis back in the 90s that required Minneapolis to demolish 770 units of public housing and redevelop them in non-concentrated areas of the region. And it really was a regional partnership and collaborative to get all these units up and running, and because of our suburban jurisdiction, the council stepped up and said, we'll take 150 of these. So the portfolio really has remained relatively the same since then, with the exception of the new 4 Edina units that were just rolled into this program. And these units are in 11 suburban communities in Anoka, Hennepin, and Ramsey counties. We've had some challenges with this program during the period of the pandemic, just like any other private or public landlord, particularly with rent collection. The current receivables for that program is $34,000, so that's how much residents owe in rent at this point. And typical prior to the pandemic, our average rent rolls and delinquencies were less than 10,000. And I think it's just the challenge of the times. Residents are having a hard time paying rent. Even though their rent is income-based and we recalculate their rent if their income goes down, I'm not exactly sure what's happening, but it's happening all over our state and all over the country where landlords are having difficulty collecting rent. There was an eviction moratorium in place in our state that fully expired on June 1st of 2022. So, almost a year ago. But prior to that, during the pandemic, landlords were prevented from filing evictions for non-payment of rent. And then I think, sometimes what happened is tenants get so far behind, it's hard to catch up. And so certainly eviction is our last resort with residents. We're working with them on budgeting. We'll set them up with financial literacy counseling. We'll set up payment plans with them to get caught up on their rent. But we do have a handful of residents right now where we're going to need to file evictions because we're not getting the rent collected. And so we established a new eviction policy procedure in conjunction with our legal counsel to have a systematic way on how we'll give a 30-day notice to a tenant before we're going to file eviction, and that's required by the federal rules for the program. But it's likely we'll be filing 3 evictions in the coming month or 2 for 3 of the residents. And again, it's our last resort. We work with them, with our outreach team. We have access to resources that we know about. We will certainly, depending on where they live, the resources are different, but Rent Help Minnesota was a large pocket of money that was available for Minnesota renters during the pandemic that is no longer a resource. And so we're back to our original rent assistance buckets like emergency assistance, Salvation Army, local organizations, nonprofits, churches, et cetera. And so we'll do whatever we can to prevent eviction. We're in the business of housing families, not evicting them, but there comes a point where we may have to do a handful of evictions. So I thought that was important for you to know. We have a property management contract with our current management company that expires 12/31/23, so that's coming up. Thank you to Stephanie Paulson, our assistant director. She's not here tonight, but I think she's watching online. Thanks, Steph. But she's been working hard with procurement. We're going to issue an RFP for a new management contract. Important to note that we've had strong performance from our existing vendor who's been with us since 2005. And when we've issued previous RFPs, we haven't gotten a lot of interest because this is 150 scattered sites in 11 different communities, 3 counties. It's expensive to operate. It's challenging to manage. But we're doing lots of outreach through Minnesota Multi-Housing and the property management companies through that and other avenues to make sure we distribute the word far and wide on that RFP.
Councilmember Johnson and then Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How much money, what's the range on that contract? What have we spent in the last year for that management contract?
Well, they get paid, Steph, I wish she was here, I think it's about $106 per unit month, so they only get paid if units are occupied, so 50 times, I'll do 110, just times 12. So it's maybe a $200,000 contract just for the fees. Okay. But then we have, maintenance, they get paid, separately for maintenance on top of that. Reimbursement for maintenance, and really the largest part of the budget for the Family Affordable Housing Program is maintenance and repair. And as these units age, the maintenance costs are going up, which is why we established a capital program just in last year's budget cycle to make sure that we're putting enough money into the program and the units to make sure that they remain assets within the community.
Madam Chair, follow-up. And is this management firm then capable when renovations need to take place? Especially if somebody's moving out of a unit, do they manage that aspect of it as well and get contractors in and everything like that?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, yes, they manage all the turnovers, unit turnovers. They do the rent collection, they do the maintenance, they do all the day-to-day showing the units, leasing the units, lease compliance. They do everything associated with the day-to-day management.
And then just finally, even though it's $200,000 plus then whatever extra work comes on board, is just always trying to think how we can get MCUB or DBE, but minority-owned companies. Even if there are other pieces of that contract, I'm just always doing the reminder out there how we can expand And I don't know if the company currently that owns it is one of those minority-owned companies, but just always thinking about how can we maybe change it so more people have opportunity as well.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, yes, that's part of the procurement process.
Thank you.
Councilmember Carter.
Thank you for noting the rarity of eviction and our focus on making certain that folks are housed and not homeless. In the rare case that we are evicting upcoming, I would assume that because you've been making connections all along to resources, we are helping to prevent homelessness, to ensure that there's at least some shelter intervention that may happen, if that's possible, and also working to keep kids in school and, consistently supporting these families with some connections. Just the reassurance that that is happening is all I need, and I thank you.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Carter, absolutely, we've been connecting with folks all along. Actually, 2 of the families that may be facing eviction are what we call zero HAP, so they're at zero assistance because their income has risen such that their income is more than the rent now. And so they're living in one of the Family Affordable Housing Program units, but they're not on the assistance program. And then one is on the assistance program, so just a little more context.
Thank you.
And so we've had some unit challenges and we have some opportunities before us, and Stephanie was before you all last March talking about this, and I think included it in another presentation as well. But we have some units that are in, have some challenging townhome association rules right now about, let's see, what is it? We work with 55 different associations with these 150 units, so all have different rules. And some have been challenging issues. We have, in some of the townhome units, we have smaller apartment-style units, so they're an upper level, maybe a very small 2-bedroom. And we have a handful of those that has been incredibly hard to rent, I think because of the unit itself, but also locational preference issues for residents that are on the waiting list for this program. So we proposed to the council, and the council approved last March, that we could sell 5 Family Affordable Housing Program units. It took us a year to get HUD approval, actually a year and a half, but we just got their approval on March, last month, so March 2023, I guess. Today's May, so May 2 months ago. And so we're anticipating we will sell these 5 units in the coming months, and then use the sale proceeds to buy additional units as replacement units, knowing that we already added 4 with the Edina program. So one of the messages we got from council members when we presented this item was net loss of units is 0. And so that's certainly our intention. If we can grow the program some, that would be great, but certainly no less than 150 in the end. We know that when we sell smaller 2-bedroom apartment style units and we want to buy a 3 or 4-bedroom single family home, that there's going to be a gap there. So we're working with our finance team on figuring all of that out. But we do want to purchase larger unit sizes. We know larger families and multi-generational families have a harder time finding housing. We've been adding bedrooms where there's opportunities to do so. We added bedrooms in 2 of the Edina units to make room for larger families. We want to purchase a fully accessible unit, which does not exist in our current portfolio. So if we could find one, and then unit locations close to the core city. We know that units with both our project-based voucher units and then the family affordable housing units, the units that are closer to the core, rent in a hot second. The further you get out into the region, the harder they are to rent, just because there aren't as many people that want to live as far out. So when we think about where we have success, that's sort of what we're thinking about for purchase opportunities. So in terms of upcoming actions where you will be able to take some action and make some policy decisions, we're beginning work right now on our public housing agency planner and our administrative plan. So this is our plan to HUD that tells HUD and the public and our residents on how we're going to serve low-income persons in our region for the coming year. You'll have final approval on that document in September, but we certainly will be before you with an information item to share what may be changing in that plan or as for recommendations. In the late summer, we hope to be before you for a Homework Starts with Home expansion. We've partnered on applications with Minnesota Housing with Carver, Anoka, and Hennepin counties on their homework starts with home applications. If they get funded, then we may be before you asking for a waiting list preference to help support those applications. We'll be before you with our property management contract for approval. We'll planning to come in late summer, early fall to give you an update on our community choice demonstration program and the progress being made there. September and October, we will have some riveting and lengthy conversations on payment standards. So those are the rent limits that we adopt for the program participants that are out shopping with their voucher. So we'll do at least one information item, maybe two if necessary, and an action item on that. There will be an action item on our utility allowance revisions. So tenants that live in affordable housing get a credit for the utilities that they pay directly to the utility company, and so we give them an allowance for that, so that needs to come before the council. I thought it'd be helpful to give you at some point an update on the disposition of the FOP units. So did we sell the 5 units? Were we able to purchase more? So we'll come and give you an update on that. And then I anticipate a project-based voucher award in mid-late December, early January time period. We have an RFP that just closed last Friday for that program, and we have several applications that we need to review, and so we'll be before you on that program as well. And that's what I have for prepared remarks. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have, and Councilmember Carter and Dolger, I'll reach out to set up another meeting with you separately.
Okay, anyone? Councilmember Johnson.
Just want to thank you, Terri, and your whole team. Again, for those of us that have been around a while, we know how hard you work, but we probably really don't know how hard you work. But it's incredible the amount of work you do and just the different layers of government and agencies and interagencies and new programs and new things you're putting forward for our clients in this program. And I'm just really grateful. And then working again with our HAT team, which is, the other part of what we do here at the Met Council. I don't know who else is doing things like we're doing across the country, but I can only imagine, and I do know in several places we're on the leading edge just because the feds come in here and try things out with us too. So I really appreciate it. It's maybe thankless work sometimes, but I just want to make sure you are thanked by this group and hopefully everyone else too.
Madam Chair, I'll pass that along to the team who does the hard work, so thank you.
Well, and I think that I'm confident I can say that that's the case for this full committee. Mm-hmm. We really deeply appreciate it, Terri, so thank you.
Thank
that
you
was
to
a
all
unanimous.
the HRA folks listening in.
Thank you. Our next item is the tax-based sharing in the metropolitan area for taxes payable 2022. Maia, I'm going to mess up your name, but I'm going to do my best. Maia Guerrero-Combs?
Close. Maia Guerrero-Combs. Yeah.
Yeah, see, I can't get that.
Get that trill.
Yeah. Way beyond me.
I mean, I might have memorized it.
Welcome, Maia.
Welcome. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members. My name is Maia Guerrero-Combs. I'm a senior planner in the Livable Communities Unit in Community Development Division. So I'm really excited to present to you today, and I'm going to be talking about the update on the Fiscal Disparities Program for the 2023 fiscal year. Okay. Perfect. So a little bit about the program. Rewind, sorry. Today I will start with a little bit of a background about the program and how it works, and then go into the numbers for the 2023 fiscal year. So our metro area is known for a tax-based sharing program, which is named the Fiscal Disparities Program. And it's named after the act that established it. And through this program, local taxing jurisdictions in the 7-county metro area all share part of the growth in commercial industrial net tax capacity, or basically all commercial industrial tax base. And so the tax-based sharing program was established by the Fiscal Disparities Act, which was passed by the Minnesota legislature in 1971. And the program then began operating in 1975. So we have over 50 years of this program since it's been enacted. The tax-based sharing program continues to attract national and international interest as an innovative tool to really improve equity and narrow the gap between the lowest and the highest communities in terms of tax-based wealth. Cool, and what are the benefits of the program? So why do we do this? The program meets various Metropolitan Council goals and has many benefits to the region, including improving equity and fiscal resources by reducing large differences in tax-based wealth among communities. The program also supports cost-effective regional wastewater treatment and transportation services by reducing competition for commercial and industrial tax base. This program, this tax-based sharing program, also encourages land uses that protect the environment and improve the livability of the region, but raise little to no revenue. So spaces like parks, open spaces, and low-income housing. So how does this program work? The program is really built into our property tax system, so a lot of the work is done by county and state property tax administrators, but I'll cover the basics on how it works in this slide. So basically, through this tax-based sharing or fiscal disparities program, local taxing jurisdictions contribute up to 40% of their growth in commercial industrial tax base, and that goes into a shared pool that's then redistributed. Commercial industrial tax base includes commercial, industrial, and public utilities, and that 40% of growth is since 1971, so since the program was enacted. Then for the distribution, so we're talking about that shared pool, it's redistributed using a formula that is outlined in the state statute. This formula is based on various factors such as population and relative property tax wealth. When I say relative property tax wealth, that means the market value of all property per person in a jurisdiction compared to the average market value per person for the metro area. So really, what does this all mean? It means a community with relatively low property tax wealth receives a somewhat larger share of area-wide tax base, and a community with relatively high property tax wealth receives a somewhat smaller share of the shared tax base. Perfect. So participation in the program, we have 179 communities that participate. There are 4 areas that are excluded by statute. Those are the cities of New Prague, Northfield, as well as the 2 major airports, so the MSP Airport and the St. Paul Airport. Besides these statutory exclusions, communities can be found ineligible to participate by the state. So the council and the Minnesota Department of Revenue have a statutory role in determining eligibility to participate in the program. According to state statute, a community must be excluded if its comprehensive zoning and planning policies conscientiously exclude most commercial industrial development for reasons other than agricultural use. This was enacted so a community who deliberately excluded commercial industrial development couldn't benefit from the sharing of commercial industrial tax base. The council takes a lead on this review with final determination set by the Minnesota Department of Revenue. And under this condition, there are four communities that are ineligible to participate, and those are Sunfish Lake, Birchwood Village, St. Mary's Point, and Woodland. And I believe these communities have been consistently ineligible since about 2002.
Excuse me, could you repeat those communities?
Yeah, of
Sunfish
course.
Lake, Birchwood?
Sunfish Lake, Birchwood Village, St. Mary's Point, and Woodland.
Thanks.
Councilmember Johnson and then Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's interesting. Were they all put in the ineligible to participate category at the same time, or did they come into that at different times, just generally?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Johnson, they came in at different times, so it depended on when they implemented their comprehensive plan. As some of you may know, I took over this program from Deb Dietrich, who was at the council for over 30 years and knows this program inside and out. So forgive me if I don't have her breadth of knowledge, but it looks like Sunfish Lake started being ineligible in 1992. Birchwood Village was 2002, St. Mary's Point and Woodland were 2003.
Okay, and the only reason I say this, I know the most about Woodland because when I ran for state senate, I door knocked it. And it's a neighborhood. There's no commercial industrial area. The homes have been there for a long time. And in most suburban communities, it would look like a development so I'm just curious, I mean, why at that point it became ineligible, because I'm sure it was fully developed. I don't need to know, but it's just interesting. I can figure that one out on my own too, or maybe not. But it's curious for me, because these are just little nodes of always been residentials. And maybe they were in it before and they weren't getting anything, either giving or getting, because they had no CI. And maybe at that point, they just went, okay, the point is moot. They're booted from the program unless something really changes in their comp plan. I don't know.
Councilmember Lee.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. Councilmember Carter and I both went to Carlton down in Northfield, so I was curious why Northfield is excluded if Rice County is not even in the Metro Met Council's jurisdiction.
Yes, so both Northfield and New Prague are excluded by statute because they don't fall under the council's jurisdiction under the planning, I should remember the Planning Act. But there are two communities who do fall under the Fiscal Disparities Act, but are not under our jurisdiction, and those are the communities of Hanover and Rockford.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just comment that Northfield does have some territory in Dakota County, but we don't plan for them, and they're generally excluded in everything that we do.
Oh, thanks.
Well, and if I recall correctly, was it 2 years ago when the author of this concept spoke to us? It was the 50th anniversary and brought his book, and it was my recollection that he gave a good explanation as to how it was initially formed, but for the life of me, I don't remember it, so. Councilmember Johnson.
I'll just briefly say, from being part of a suburban community for about 20 years, this come up regularly, and it just, the greater good was really important to really understand, because otherwise you're giving away a whole bunch of your CI anything after 1971. So imagine in a growing community like Plymouth that has a big core of CI. It was hard when you were struggling with your own, how do we get money to fix the roads? How do we get money to put in our own affordable housing? How do we try to keep tax increases at bay? It is hard for some communities to just knowingly share it. But at the same time, you flip that coin in those communities and you know that it is leveling out the playing field. But yeah, every year we had the discussion.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just comment that this happened before spreadsheets were a big thing. And now that everybody does down and to the right to see what their number is, I don't think it would ever happen, but it was a different time.
Yeah, it was a different time, very much so. Okay, Maya?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So moving on to the next slide. So for the 2023 fiscal year numbers, so what was the shared tax base for 2023 in the metro area? The shared pool of commercial industrial tax base was a little under 9% of the total tax base for taxes payable for 2023, which is really consistent with what we've seen in the last 10 years, and slightly lower than last year, which was around 10% of the total tax base. That shared pool as a share of the total commercial industrial tax base in the metro area is 34% for 2023, which is also consistent with what we've seen in the last 10 years, and again, slightly lower than last year, which was 36%.
And Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilmember.
Thank you, and maybe you're getting to this, but, yeah, and Councilmember Carter, you've served in county government, so maybe you're familiar with this, but it's interesting too that there are givers and takers each year, depending on what your city is doing. So Minneapolis has been a receiver, and then they've also been a giver, and same can be true for other communities. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon when big swings are changing in the market, and sometimes commercial industrial is just going gangbusters, and then you hit a moment and nobody can buy or sell.
She's doing that in a
Oh,
couple
sorry.
slides.
I'm getting ahead of you, sorry. Can you see I'm a little passionate about this?
Maya, you may proceed. We'll wait with our comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Continuing on 2023 numbers, if I can find my right paper, there we go. So for 2023, we shared over 531 million in tax base for taxes payable and 710 million in tax revenue.
Maya, can I ask this may not even be a relevant question, but I'll throw caution to the winds. What impact will COVID and its impact on downtowns, particularly Minneapolis and St. Paul, have on this?
Madam Chair, the numbers have stayed relatively consistent. There could be some downward maybe in the future, but so far the numbers haven't represented any fluctuations for the last about 10 years, from what I've seen.
And this is going back too far, and you don't have to answer this question tonight if you don't want to, but I'm curious as to what impact the economic downturn in 2008, 2009 had on it.
Madam Chair, that's a great question. So that was kind of there was a kind of turning point where a lot of the recipients became contributors. So I think a lot of the commercial industrial tax base started centralizing after kind of these shifts in economic and economic swings. So during that time, you saw Minneapolis, which is one of the larger players in this program, go from being a recipient to a contributor. And,
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So net recipients and net contributors, a great segue into my next slide. So because the Fiscal Disparities Program redistributes shared tax base, communities are either net recipients or net contributors of tax base. Net recipients or net gainers of tax base are communities where the distribution from the shared pool was greater than the contribution to the shared pool. For 2023, there were 107 net recipients, including 91 cities and 16 townships. And then for net contributors, meaning the community's contribution to the shared pool was greater than the distribution from the shared pool, there were 72 total net contributors for 2023, 48 cities, and 24 townships. And historically, the program has always had more net recipients than net contributors. So here we have a map of all net recipients or net contributors for the tax-based sharing program. The areas that are white are areas that are excluded from the program, either from statute or ineligibility. So you can see the airport as well as the communities that are excluded. The light red or pink areas are net recipients, and the light blue are net contributors. And then in the next slide, we have the top 20 of both. So this map shows the top 20 net contributors and top 20 net recipients. The top 20 net recipients are in the light red color, and the top 5 of those are St. Paul, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, Coon Rapids, and Apple Valley. And St. Paul has long been the top net recipient. The top 20 net contributors are in blue, and as you can see, they're mostly located in areas that are connected to major job centers and public infrastructures such as the I-94, I-694 ring, and the MSP airport. And these top 20 net recipients make up nearly top 20 net contributors make up nearly 60% of all commercial industrial tax base in the metro area. So how does this reduce disparities in property tax wealth? The program works to reduce big disparities in property tax wealth and improve equity in fiscal resources. The difference in property tax wealth is measured by the ratio of the highest to the lowest commercial industrial tax base per person for communities with a population of 10,000 or more. Without fiscal disparities, the ratio of the highest to lowest commercial tax base per person is 16:1. With fiscal disparities, that difference narrows to 6:1, creating a more equitable region in regards to fiscal resources. And if we include all participating communities, so not just 10,000 or more, it is 113:1, narrows down to 14:1 with fiscal disparities, so quite a difference. Great, and at this time, I can take any questions.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one more comment. There's $5 million that comes out of that pool that comes to the Met Council each year for the tax base revitalization account, where we make grants to communities to clean up polluted properties and get them back on the tax rolls. So you'll be hearing more about that when we get into more livable community stuff.
Thank you. It's good information for all of us to have, whether we're new or have forgotten about that.
Well, I think it's
But it's
important to
important.
remember when we're granting that money out, that it's not our levy, it's money that came from the whole region for the purpose of getting the tax base back in places where it's undevelopable because of pollution.
Well, I wish I could remember the name of the author of the book who spoke to us,
Paul Gilgee.
Paul Gilgee. If I recall correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong and anybody remembers, but I seem to remember him saying that anywhere else where he's talked about this program, people are just almost drooling. They're so envious that we have this kind of a setup here in the metropolitan area and the benefits that it has for the whole region, ultimately. And he basically acknowledged what you did earlier, that you wouldn't be able to do it again. You know, it would be too hard to try and replicate today because of those spreadsheets. Councilmember Wolf. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just add that this is layered against separately formalized the local government aid. So that was the Minnesota miracle that I think the governor actually referenced in his State of the State address when Wendell Anderson at the time put the sales tax in place, and then that became the pot of money that through formula would be divided across the state for participating communities, cities, essentially. So I just want to layer that one in there because that also is tax base, well, sales tax, but wealth sharing across the state. And I think too, maybe it was when we were talking about the tax-based revitalization program during my first 4 years here, and I'd like to see this, maybe not for tonight's meeting, but when we do talk about that again with the team that's working on all of that, but I'd like to see over time that money that got invested into a site that was polluted, contaminated, had some other things going on with it where the money was invested, and I'd like to see what that ROI is now, to see what additional CI tax base increase the community got for the money invested. Because we've been doing this long enough now that that'd be the flip side of the coin. How did those investments pay out?
Any other questions or comments? Maya, thank you very much. This was a great presentation, and you've clearly hit the ground running, so.
It's really interesting.
I bet, and you're good at it, so thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members.
And next, we have the regional growth scenarios, opportunities and challenges with Raya Esmaeili, and Katelyn Champoux. Raya, I have to say that initially when you started presenting to the committee, whenever I'd hear Chair Lindgren say your name, I thought he was calling you Mrs. Mealy. And there was something about the way he said it, and I remember thinking, why is he calling her that? It was just funny. So
Now it became clear.
yeah, it became clear. Took me a little while, but I figured it out.
Okay, good, great.
Thank you both for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm Raya Esmaeili. I'm a planning analyst and local planning assistant in community development. I'm also a sector rep for districts 4 and 12. I also want to introduce my colleague, Katelyn Champoux. She's a planner in LPA. We work together, and today we're here to talk to you about the opportunities and challenges that are associated with the regional growth scenarios that you heard about in the last couple of meetings. So we'll share some findings from our analysis that we've been doing on these regional growth scenarios, but we also want to hear your feedback on some of the analysis that you'll see today, and maybe some of the items that we're missing, and also helping us set direction for the regional policy development as part of the next steps of this process. So I'm going to now hand it over to Katelyn to start the presentation with the actual content of it.
Thank you, Raya. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. As Raya said, I'm Katelyn Champoux. I'm a planner in local planning assistance. So today we'll start off by giving an overview of how we identified opportunities and challenges of the regional growth scenarios. And we'll follow this by highlighting some of the opportunities and challenges identified within each cross-cutting issue, pausing after each issue to open it up for some questions and discussion. And then at the end, we'll close with some information on next steps. So as you've learned about at the past 2 committee meetings, the council is using scenario planning to explore multiple future development scenarios, which allows us to better prepare for future uncertainties as we plan for 2050. So scenario planning helps evaluate different policy alternatives with respect to the council's level of authority and investment. It's also an effective tool to evaluate equity impacts of policy choices. So aside from the business as usual scenario, which explores the future if current growth trends continue, the council is also exploring 4 different futures. So there's high growth compact development, high growth dispersed development, low growth compact development, and low growth dispersed development. And by identifying the opportunities and challenges associated with each potential future, we can explore the ways in which our region, like I said before, can take advantage of the opportunities and mitigate the challenges of different futures in order to be better prepared for all possible circumstances. This slide shows the 4 cross-cutting regional issues, which are natural systems, equity, climate, and public health, safety, and well-being. And these cross-cutting issues set the foundation for the current working draft of the regional vision, which the council endorsed at the Committee of the Whole meeting on February 1st of this year. So in our analysis, we used the cross-cutting issues to ground our work as we evaluated opportunities and challenges of the regional growth scenarios. The findings represent a comparison between each scenario and the business as usual scenario, which is why you'll see some qualifying language like less and more in our descriptions of the opportunities and challenges. And I also want to point out that the findings from this analysis may not include all opportunities and challenges presented by the regional growth scenarios. That said, if you have ideas that aren't represented in the information that we're sharing today, please share them with us. We'd love to hear that. And we organized the following slides by cross-cutting issue. So I'll start with the opportunities and challenges related to natural systems in the region, and then open it up for discussion, and then we'll continue that format through the rest of the cross-cutting issues. But as we go through each cross-cutting issue, we'd like you to consider these 3 questions. So what's missing, which opportunities and challenges are critical to address, and what policies help us address those opportunities and challenges to achieve our regional vision. As you'll see in the presentation, all scenarios present both opportunities and challenges for one or more cross-cutting issue, but we hope that through this process we can start to identify ways to take advantage of the opportunities and navigate the challenges. For the sake of time, I'll only highlight a few opportunities and challenges for each of the cross-cutting issues, but you can find the full list on the presentation slides and in the information item linked in the agenda. And for discussion, we want you to think about all opportunities and challenges identified in the analysis. So if there's something that you think is important that we didn't identify or that I don't say in the presentation, we want you to bring those up as well. So before I dive into the content on this slide, I want to point out a few things. First, rather than talk through each scenario individually, I'll share some of the general highlights of the slide as a whole. And then second, at the top of each slide, you'll see a list of the themes that emerged during our analysis, and these are specific to each cross-cutting issue. And then third, you may notice some repetition of the opportunities or challenges across the scenarios, and this happens because some opportunities and challenges are only associated with one characteristic of a scenario. So for example, the opportunity may be associated with compact development. So you'll see the same opportunity or challenge come up in low-growth compact and high-growth compact. But with that said, we'll start with the opportunities for natural systems in the region. And our analysis showed that, in general, compact development supports the preservation of high-quality and contiguous natural areas by reducing the demand for greenfield development. It also creates opportunities for natural resource preservation by reducing the amount of agricultural land lost to development and reducing the amount of new impervious surfaces needed to accommodate development. We also note that low growth is generally associated with lower demand for various systems, which could put less pressure on water recharge areas and provide opportunities to address gaps in regional systems, such as the regional parks and trail system. And then as we move into the challenges associated with natural systems, you may start to see some similarities that I mentioned before. For example, the same way compact development supports the preservation of contiguous natural areas, dispersed development increases the fragmentation of natural areas. Dispersed development also puts greater pressure on development of agricultural land and may result in more unsewered rural residential development. Additionally, high growth generally means higher demand for natural resources. So this puts more stress on natural resources used for recreation, such as the park system, lakes, and other water bodies. And high growth also creates greater demand for water resources, which may increase drinking water vulnerability, especially in times of drought. And so I'll pause there and go on to our discussion slide. So given the information that I just shared on opportunities and challenges for natural systems, we want to hear your thoughts on what may be missing from this, what is critical to address as we look to 2050, and what policies may be able to help us address those critical opportunities and challenges. So I'll open up for questions, comments, so please feel free to start anywhere.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you for providing this in this way. I really appreciate how you've broken it out. Couple of things. Did you work with developers and those that are familiar with the fluctuations in the market, whether it comes to commercial, industrial, or housing, and what those trends are? So as somebody who has governed over a community that was 50,000 when I started and over 80,000 when I left, and now I represent 11 cities, many of which now are starting to see development pick up, and their comp plans, of course, have been approved. I think Independence is still coming through the pipeline, but and then I've got Greenfield out in my neck of the woods that's got some ag. I'm just trying to understand how is the statement that it puts less pressure on the development of ag, is that because we feel like the market isn't going to still push for that? Because we've got that, well, I know in other parts of the region there's probably more than what I represent in the Northwest area, but the market's going to do what the market's going to do. Not everybody wants to live in compact development. Some people want an acre or 5 acres. So how do you manage what the market does? We don't have a crystal ball. If we did, we'd all be rich. But nothing, no matter how compact you make development, I'm just not sure what it does when you've still got things, characteristics where people want to land, raise a family, retire, all of those things.
Madam Chair, Councilmember, I'll hand it over to Raya.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson. To answer your first question, have we worked with developers in creating the list that you're seeing? We have not. This is, at this point, an internal work structure as we are working on figuring out these opportunities and challenges of the scenarios which would then lead to the policies, which will come to you at multiple levels and stages. We don't intend to put out a variety of unknowns out for comments necessarily, but rather when we have some more concrete ideas for these could be the policies or long-range policies of the Metropolitan Council. We do have extensive engagement in mind for the Regional Development Guide as a whole, and multiple layers of external stakeholders will be involved at that level. And this exercise is just to help us make sure that those policies are as comprehensive as we can think because of all these unknown factors, basically. Going back to the point that you brought up about whether we think low growth leads to less agricultural development. Did you mention low growth or compact?
Well, I was just, compact development helps to save it, so the inverse would be
Sure.
true then too, I suppose, under this scenario, based on the columns.
Councilmember Johnson, you're correct that we don't necessarily know what the market will do, and I think that historically with the what happened in 2008 and 2009, that very clearly showed that we don't necessarily know what could happen. However, based on past experiences and trends that we have seen, it's if the policies are structured in a way that are encouraging a certain pattern of growth, if you will, that can potentially help with less demand on land that is completely undeveloped in the past, so a greenfield development. Specifically for low growth, growth, which basically means lower population growth, and that is lower than business as usual. It basically just means there's less demand. If less demand, the market, it will tell itself that there's not enough demand to just go out and build as far as you can see. That being said, exactly what you're bringing up is why we are doing this exercise and scenario planning, because some of these factors, even though we have tried to put it in these buckets of scenarios, they are still unknown. So we're trying to make sure that we kind of capture all the potential good things and all the potential challenges that we may not, as a Metropolitan Council, want to endorse are captured, so that later on the policies that we are putting forward address them both ways, because we will only have one set of policies, and this is like very detailed, several step back before it even gets there. So I think that hopefully it will answer that, and that this is just a potential outcome, but we want to make sure that the policies are addressing the cross-cutting issues and the vision of the Metropolitan Council, while providing flexibility to communities to be able to respond to demands that is even out of their hand sometimes.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. Just to follow up, so I really appreciate this, because the team is really good at putting these frameworks together for policymakers to review, and we're doing that. So I acknowledge that, and I think it's awesome. I would say, though, again, from 20-some years ago and being in local government, and we learned about smart growth, and we learned about compact development, and we learned about all the different strategies back then that were coming out of Met Council. Not just Met Council, these are nationwide and, tested in other countries and all of that too. But I will say, it would seem to me that we have a lot of, in the 50-some years we've been doing this, that there are others out there, whether it's developers, realtors, what have you, that I understand will get to the public comment part, but so many other policies we have here, we start early with a lot of engagement and then build up so that we can hear those thoughts and comments and at least get them at the baseline, and then maybe we can weave them in later. I think it's a lot more challenging, having been on the other side of where Met Council is going on some things, to go, wow, it seems like we missed a section of folks that should have been brought in earlier. So I'm just telling you, for 20-some years and representing my communities, it's not that we're opposed to development or doing it a certain way, but it's just who knows this system better. And it would be lovely at one point if we could get where the development community isn't looking at us like we're the bad guy and, pointing fingers. So that's just my only thought when you ask, I'm not saying, something in the columns are missing. I'm just saying there are people who do this day in and day out, have all the trends. Yes, the 2008s happen and the 2020s happen, but even in that, we've probably learned a few things. So that's my only comment. I appreciate this process, but I can tell you if I had some folks in that community that, you know, works, and I would flip that around too, the people that are in preservation, right? The land trust and all of that. I just think eyes earlier to just give us some insights would be great and roll it out and get all of the voices in there. So thank you.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got comments about the whole scenario thing as a whole, but I'm going to just talk about the actual things that are on the slides right now. It seems like the stuff that's under the dispersed categories doesn't really recognize how development happens in the edges of the region, because looking under the challenges section, things like pressure on park expansion, communities charge park dedication fees on all new development, which is different from how Minneapolis and St. Paul did things. They've, you know, the core cities are now doing more of those park dedication fee kind of things, but this has been standard practice in the developing areas for quite some time. So there's a pipeline for making all of those active sort of parks separate from our regional parks, which are more preservation and enjoying nature kind of things. But there's a pipeline to provide parks for all of those new residents as part of the development process. So I don't know if that pressure on park expansion is actually reality, given how things work in the development world. And same with more impervious surface worsens water quality issues. I was involved in the Planning Commission in Lakeville from 1996 to 2002, and City Council from 2003 to 2009, and I'm still representing them here. And there's been tremendous growth, but there's also been improvement in surface water quality because of all of the stormwater improvements that go on. With each development, not only are they required to
Clean Water Act.
to not have any increased runoff from what they had before, but they're doing things along the way with ponding and recharge areas and different things to improve the water quality better than what it was. So Lakeville, having gone from, I don't know, it was probably 25,000 people when I moved there to 75,000 people now, the water quality in the lakes is better than it was. So assuming that development is going to make water quality worse, I don't think holds up with the way development goes now. The rules that we have in place are really quite good when it comes to stormwater management and improving the water quality.
And those are federal mandates.
Well, but there's,
Just in case people don't know.
and then,
Councilmember Johnson, what did you say?
Those are federal mandates. The Clean Water Act started it all. But I would just agree with Councilmember Wolf. 20-some years of letting water be better than when it started. That was the mandate.
also with fragmentation of natural areas, communities as part of their comprehensive plan identify the high-quality natural resources in greenway corridors so that you have connected areas that stay preserved and basically undeveloped, maybe with some trails through them, but it provides those connections for animals to be able to travel throughout the community, you know, staying in corridors rather than isolated pockets and then getting hit by cars all the time. So I think there's challenges here that it doesn't recognize how development actually works. We have very high quality plans in the areas that are growing quickly because you have to. You can't make it up as you go. If you tried to do one-offs for every development, you'd be just paralyzed when you're seeing a large amount of growth. So our comprehensive plan process recognizes that, and we get those high-quality plans before the development happens. And a lot of these things that are listed as challenges really don't end up being challenges. They're just part of the development process that is recognized in our comprehensive planning.
Interesting. Councilmember Johnson.
Just briefly, and that's exactly why I said, looking at that development community and how it really works, I would just look at many of these things and go, but in reality, cities first, like Councilmember Wolf said, we approve the plan that they're working from. And, you know, I would push back on some of this too. And that's why I just thought, you know, bring in the people that are actually in the field doing the development. I will tell you, when a developer came to my city and they wanted things to be done, those park dedication fees were high because the land costs were high, but they had to prepare recreational space for all of the people that would be moving in. They had to ensure that national urban runoff ponds were being built so that the water leaving that development was better than when they started. So I just echo what Councilmember Wolf is saying, and that's why some of these things that are seen as negative, you know, maybe if somebody's out there not following the rules, but that's pretty hard these days, and the developers know what they're doing. So that's why I raised that question.
If I may just add one point, thank you, Councilmember Wolf and Johnson, for your comments. I acknowledge that this may not capture everything. I do also want to acknowledge that it doesn't mean that everything and every development has necessarily these challenges, because we do, like with areas such as natural resources, when the council does not have the kind of authority that it has in some other areas, we can't necessarily ensure certain things happen, and we have seen instances that that fragmentation or you know, development of high quality natural resources have happened. So this doesn't necessarily apply to everybody the same way, and the examples that you brought up, I think, are good examples of showing how some cities are doing it the best way that they possibly can with the resources they have. And there are some outliers that we still would like to be able to capture that. But thank you for bringing up your points. We have made notes to make sure that we address them.
Madam Chair, I don't know what the exception to the rule is here. So if you have exceptions that aren't doing it the way they should be, causing some of these problems, if they are the rule, I think then leave them in the column. I just don't know if they're the rule. So I'd like to just know more about which communities or what types of developments out there that have developed in the last couple of decades under Met Council guidelines. And it's true, we might not be able to control all of the aspects that we're hoping for, but other agencies are. There are, you know, many agencies out there that are watching, whether it's the DNR or, you know, state boards, the required EAWs and all of that have to go in. So I'm not trying to set up a debate here. I'm just telling you that you asked for some comments and people who represent a large part of the region, and suburban and emerging edge and greenfields, we're kind of like just giving you what we think and what probably all the voices in our heads from our community members would be telling you right now.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Other comments, questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to equity, we see that for opportunities, the higher densities associated with compact development create more potential for affordable housing and life cycle housing, and that compact development also offers the opportunity to enhance the transit network and promote bikeability and walkability, which helps address mobility challenges experienced by low-income and or aging communities. And then we also have a point about how low growth may put less pressure on housing prices. And then, as you can see on this slide,
I'm sorry, Katelyn.
sorry.
Could I ask a clarifying question? And I don't know if you two would know the answer, but I'm guessing somebody here would know. Are BRT lines project eligible for transit-oriented development funds too?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
As you can see on this slide, there are significant equity challenges across all of the scenarios. In general, high growth increases housing demand, putting upward pressure on housing prices, and therefore reducing overall affordability. This also may contribute to increased homelessness and increase the need for public housing subsidies. And when coupled with compact development, high growth may lead to accelerated displacement and gentrification in historically disinvested areas. Additionally, dispersed development is less conducive to the expansion of a high-frequency, full-service transit network, which negatively impacts transit-dependent populations. And then dispersed development also increases commuting costs as people choose to live further from the center of the region. So with that, I will pause for discussion again.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of this it kind of assumes that we live in a closed system, which we don't. And we saw in the 2000s, people going out to St. Michael and Albertville and farther out, and then it started again before the pandemic and accelerated during the pandemic of people moving farther out since they didn't have to go to downtown Minneapolis to work anymore. If we squeeze the barriers too much on where people can develop, we're going to see leapfrogging again, more so because people are not nearly as tied to where they work as they have been traditionally in the metro area. One of the challenges that I see so first of all, compact development, whether you can have dispersed development but still be higher density. And this doesn't seem like it really recognizes that. There's been a lot more apartment complexes being constructed farther out than there had been traditionally. When I was on the Lakeville City Council, I think we had gone probably 20 or more years without a single market rate apartment building being built in the community, in spite of all of the fast growth. And now we've had lots of market rate they're going up everywhere. So the housing price thing is not so much related to the compact versus dispersed as it is the density. But the other challenge is that when you're pressing all of that development in a small area, land prices get really, really high everywhere in the region than when there is more opportunity for land availability. So the housing price thing is a lot more complex than it comes across in the lists here.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments and agree. And I would say too, as we look at this, there are a couple spots on here where we talk about job accessibility for transit users. You know, think about what Councilmember Wolf was just saying, and I'll use my district as an example, but we've got a 94 corridor of commerce that is getting all kinds of funding right now because we've got all kinds of businesses, warehousing and transportation centers. We've got med tech, biotech. I mean, huge investments are coming in at 610 and 94, all of that. So they are desperate for people that can work there and get there. So which is it, the chicken and the egg? Is it where the housing lands and then jobs will come, or is it where jobs go and then people are trying to get there? So in some of these scenarios, if I could get, you know, in development, I mean, Rogers and Dayton are going gangbusters right now, which is why we have a transit problem, because we don't have transit up there yet. So I would just say, again, I guess I'd like to talk a little bit more about in these housing themes around equity, especially around equity, is, you know, where are the good paying jobs? And maybe dispersed dense housing is the way to get people to the jobs. I mean, if you go up to northwestern Minnesota, you've got employers up there that are building compact, dense, affordable housing just so that they will have workers to manage and maintain the plants, and they are being paid well up there. So all I'm saying is, you know, I don't know what scenario this is coming in at over the entire 7-county region, but where we've got some, you know, high dispersed opportunities, the positives, right? There are no opportunities identified. Well, I don't know. I mean, I would really like to see some high-density nodes up along on 94 because they're desperate for workers. So the jobs are there. We can't undo that. So I don't know how long it'll be before transit gets there. So I just, for me, I would imagine some of my employers would go, gosh, we would like some of this, you know, higher density dispersed. And I'm assuming when we say dispersed, we mean they're not in the core city. In my area, dispersed might mean something different.
Actually, may I answer that?
Absolutely, right.
Because I think that might alleviate some of the concerns that you've brought up, both Councilmember Johnson and Wolf. Compact and dispersed does not mean an apartment building versus a single-family home, and it does not mean Minneapolis versus Maple Grove. It means compact as in continuing building where infrastructure already exists versus continuing building in areas that there is no infrastructure. So compact is more about the pattern of growth as it is about a development itself. So that's why it doesn't, like compact development, in fact, does include all the areas that you mentioned, because all of those areas are in fact already, the infrastructure already exists there. That's what we mean by compact. So it means all of the areas. It doesn't mean Minneapolis, St. Paul specifically.
So Madam Chair, if I may, what is dispersed then? Maybe that's the question I should have asked. What does dispersed mean? Because usually people, when they're talking about dispersed, they mean my part of the world or Wendy's part of the world.
If I may, Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, dispersed means that, first of all, let me go back for a second. Even cities such as Watertown and New Germany that are out in Carver County that are very small, if they are building right around the area that the local infrastructure exists, that to us is still compact. As in, you are not going out, way out, miles out, that now local infrastructure, council regional infrastructure has to be expanded to reach you. That's why one of the items that was mentioned in the natural resources section as for challenges was potentially more development being on individual sewer systems, because those areas will definitely not get any kind of service, whether local or regional, because they're just like, it's not efficient. So dispersed basically means that if you have, and I don't want to call it nodes, because then it will make it seem like I'm still talking about just Minneapolis and St. Paul inside the metro area, but if you think of the part of the metro that has all that infrastructure, is served and all of that, and then all these like little nodes around that are rural centers, or some of the other areas. Dispersed means areas in between. Like all of that area that is, a lot of it is agricultural land or potentially just natural areas, a lot of wetland, for example, in Anoka County. And so dispersed means building there, basically.
Thank you. I think that was my understanding. My only thought is, over years, there would have been, and there were parts of my community that didn't have the MUSA line yet, so we had to wait. I'm just telling you, though, I would like to see more as it relates to jobs, because jobs are moving fast, and we don't have some of the infrastructure that we need there, but we need people to live there. And I would also say that, you know, maybe what we're doing too in some of this is saying, you know, if you're in those dispersed areas, you know, the affordable housing problem then really isn't yours as much as it relates to, you know, compact transportation, transit options, because those communities are so highly challenged, but they still have housing goals, right? So, and there's not enough money. So I guess I don't know, maybe I've been around too long. I've been living this long enough where some of this is, I'm questioning it as I read it and as I'm trying to understand it, and I can guarantee you planners and developers would probably come back with some of this, and I appreciate, again, the process we're going through, for sure, but I just don't want to get down a path so far without maybe really fully recognizing the flip side of some of these coins. That's all.
Thank you.
This is really good discussion. Really good discussion. Councilmember Carter.
Yeah, I really do appreciate the discussion. And again, with the qualifiers that you shared with us, that compact and dispersed can be in a core area or it can be in other areas. Sometimes it's not the geography that we're talking about, it's the method, you know, that we're talking about. And of course, the infrastructure. And I don't think that even if we were talking about geography specifically, that the philosophies we're seeing here, you know, or the conclusions that we're discussing limit or forbid development. I think it just helps us to know what we're weighing, what's connected to what, so that as we talk about our tools for encouraging or supporting development, we can assess what, in fact, the region realizes connected to the region's goals. So I'm really thankful for the discussion. I think we always have to keep in front of us the region's goals, and I really love the connection to the cross-cutting issues that help us to do that. So thank you to everyone who's raised the issues and also to the discussion you're putting in front of us, because it does perk those thoughts and it helps us to keep those connections in mind, because everything is connected. And I just want to make that comment. I appreciate the questions being raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilmember Carter. Thank you for bringing that up. You're absolutely right. We're at no point are saying this is against development, for example, but certainly trying to align some of these potential future outcomes with council goals and vision, rather, not goals, vision.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the equity things that has popped up in my mind, looking at future development, is the issue of like snow removal and parking and whatnot. When you see the drastic difference between some communities on that in the wintertime, if you don't have a four-wheel drive vehicle, you can't get there from here for days or weeks on end, and fire trucks can't get through, and ambulances and everything. We have some really stark differences across the region on dealing with that, and it seems like it's getting worse, more stark differences rather than better over time, particularly as some of the core communities are opposing having off-street parking, which for a lot of the outer communities is a way to be able to very quickly clear the snow and make things livable. But there's more and more pressure in the built-up parts of the region on those street parking, not only for snow removal, but if you don't have a place to park your car, how can you have an electric car that you can never plug in because you don't have a spot at your house to park it?
I have a question of both the committee and Raya and Katelyn. We've gone through two of the scenarios. We've got two more to go.
Let's go.
Do you want to keep going, or would you prefer that we ask that Raya and Katelyn come back and finish? I just want to, I want your feedback. I need to be out of here by 6:15 is the only hang-up. So.
Madam Chair, I say let's go. We
Okay.
keep going as see where we get, where
Let's
we're
go
kinda
in terms of
going,
keep
so-
going.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Sounds good. Are we ready to move on
Yes.
to the next one? Okay. So the next cross-cutting issue is climate. To start, generally, as we said, low growth means fewer people, and that's fewer compared to the business as usual, and which generally means lower greenhouse gas emissions, again, compared to the business as usual. Additionally, compact development helps reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions by shortening travel distances to reach goods and services and potentially other amenities. Compact development also helps preserve natural areas, which allows for carbon sequestration that mitigates climate change. So those are overall bigger pictures for opportunities on climate. Now, for challenges associated with climate, similarly that there's a relationship between low growth and lower greenhouse gas emissions. High growth generally increases the greenhouse gas emissions, again, compared to business as usual, due to the larger population. It's just more people, more GHG. Dispersed development also increases transportation-related GHG emissions, and that is due to longer travel distances to reach the goods, services, and other amenities. So exactly almost the opposite of the opportunity. Additionally, increased density associated with compact development may exacerbate the urban heat island effect in those areas. So now I will pause for discussion, similar questions that you're now familiar with at this point. What's missing? What is critical to you? And what policies help us address the items mentioned?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I probably will anyway. It's one of those days. I'm looking at the maps from 2 weeks ago, and the dispersed shows more growth in communities that are already developing it for the most part. I mean, there's some, like, I don't know if that's Corcoran.
Probably.
That gets a lot of growth, but a lot of it is showing in places like Apple Valley and Savage and places that are already in the MUSA. So I'm questioning the characterization that it represents more a huge amount of unsewered development versus just more density within existing suburban areas on the more dispersed, which then brings back all of those comments that I had before. But I don't have as many comments on the climate change part of it, other than that we can't assume that people are driving long distances just because they're out on the edge. I mean, in the 30 years that I've lived in Lakeville, I've driven shorter and shorter distances as all of the amenities came to me. You know, when I first got there, I had to drive to Apple Valley to go to the grocery store because we didn't have grocery stores. Now I've got grocery stores coming out my ears, and I could walk to the grocery store if milk wasn't so darn heavy. You know, so I don't know that we can assume the travel patterns based on the distribution.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Johnson.
And this is we're trying to look prospectively, how far into the future? Is it part of our 2050? Is that, so how do we, and I'm gonna look at Councilmember Lindstrom here, how do we factor in where we're going with the mandates on renewable energy, electrification? I think 2030 is a big number. There's other numbers out there. How are we factoring in those future moments that we don't know exactly, but is there a way to calibrate what we think will happen and in consideration that the region still grows? Because I just am curious, because, you know, greenhouse gas emissions, but, you know, we're really working hard to mitigate that.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, thank you for bringing that up, because it's actually one of the points about this exercise and the fact that we are comparing things with the business as usual is that what you're bringing up is an uncertainty in itself. Those rules and some of those mandates don't quite exist in many cases. Electric vehicles, for example, those policies are in discussion right now. And they are not set in place yet. If they were, we would be able to say, with business as usual, this is how it will continue. So we are unable to factor in that uncertainty further. So that is an uncertainty in itself. That being said, generally speaking, even in the 2040, in Thrive MSB 2040, some of those instances still made it into the plan, but more in the form of recommendation or that best practices, potentially resources for communities. But because it by itself is an unknown, we did not bring it in because we weren't able to rely on it, basically.
And Madam Chair, I appreciate that, because you have to deal with what you know. But here is my unprofessional, not an expert like Peter is. When I start seeing just about every car manufacturer putting commercials into my living room, in my app, it's following me all around, I'm thinking my next car is probably going to be electric. It's everywhere. They're starting to bring it into the smaller, but they've got the trucks that pull boats, got my interest on that one. You know, that's telling me the market is shifting because the manufacturers know where this is gonna end up. And, you know, with Biden, feds putting, you know, credits and incentives into purchasing these vehicles, you know, that first edge goes, and then there's a next edge and a next edge. And I just think that it'd be nice to see at least a nod in some of our documentation of what, again, there are experts out there that probably can predict. People are placing market bets on this. Those are people that aren't gonna place stupid bets, right? So there's gotta be people out there that know, you know, even in our marketplace, how many will start embracing this by this year, and then when the mandates kick in. That's probably so far maybe out of the wheelhouse of what we're trying to do here, but I think it looks like we've missed something if there's at least not some acknowledgement that it's happening. Because we ourselves, through our electrification of our buses, are trying to beat the 2050 plan. The pressure's on us, and we know that that means the grid has to sustain everybody. And Wendy has a good point, you know, retrofitting everybody to plug in, and if you don't have a spot, then how do you do that? So that's all I'm saying on this is, you know, some acknowledgement that we're gonna be off fossil fuel to some degree.
Raya.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, can you clarify if you are saying that those acknowledgements need to happen here in the opportunities and challenges versus our policies in general? Because these are to lead into the policies themselves, which will include those items that you've mentioned.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you for that, because until now I didn't know that. But yes, I think there should be an acknowledgement, because I'm just a person, policymaker, reading this, and I'm like, I wonder how they're gonna factor that in. And so anybody else just looking at that goes, gosh, it does seem pretty status quo, and I don't want anybody to think we're about status quo. I mean, we have to be reality-based, but I think the reality is shifting.
Sure.
So,
Thank you.
One other area, and to some extent, some of this could possibly fit in with the public health, safety, and well-being, but it probably covers both, and that's the weather events. I hate the word phrase weather events, because it sounds like a party, and it's not. And it gets back somewhat to the whole snow issue that Councilmember Wolf brought up, but it's even more than that in terms of what, you know, the communities along the St. Croix and the Mississippi River are experiencing right now, and what we'll be watching out for in the coming months as it relates to severe summer storms, where that fits in terms of transit when there's a weather event and transit needs to make accommodations, the impact on our parks and open space, our trails, the impact on our housing. I think that needs to be noted somehow as well, and give direction to the future policies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We did at least include the urban heat island effect. Some of the ones that you mentioned would be across the board,
Right.
regardless of the scenario.
Right.
The same way that when previously we tried to use localized flooding for some of our information, we were unable to do that because it's everywhere.
Right.
And you're absolutely right, though, that we can include some of them, for example, as it relates to infrastructure potentially, and we will make sure to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does our expert on climate want
Oh,
to?
my gosh. No, I'm
Okay.
just soaking it in, although I will, now that you bring it up, I will say we are hearing from folks, I am hearing from folks to incorporate VMT, vehicle miles traveled, into the 2050 plan to a greater extent that it has in years past. And that we continue to play a role in where our charging infrastructure goes across the region.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Lister.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Guess we're ready for the last, but certainly not least, of the cross-cutting issues. That's public health, safety, and well-being. So first we'll cover the opportunities in general. We noticed that the level of growth in general didn't make a difference in these scenarios and didn't have much impact on this issue, but rather that development pattern, that the compactness versus dispersed, is the main driver of the opportunities and challenges in this cross-cutting issue. While there are no opportunities identified for both of the dispersed scenarios, so that's both high growth and dispersed and low growth and dispersed, the compact development presents several opportunities to support public health, safety, and well-being. For example, it creates generally more walkable neighborhoods with greater access to goods and services, especially if there are areas that there's a mix of uses, so you can more easily walk to them. It also allows for some stronger social support network, potentially with people living in greater proximity to each other.
I'll wait until you get to the question side.
For the challenges, dispersed development makes it more difficult to connect the growing number of residents, especially in the high growth scenario, to local resources, and that could potentially disproportionately impact already underserved communities. Additionally, the dispersed development is not conducive to creating walkable communities. It likely perpetuates existing mobility or health challenges. And then finally, dispersed development means more development potentially on individual sewage treatment system, which increases the potential for failure of these systems. Okay, now we're back to discussion, questions on the cross-cutting issue of public health and safety.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I read this list, I was kind of stunned because it doesn't reflect my reality, I guess, living in the metro, because when you look at the map from 2 weeks ago, it shows a lot more people in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I don't know that that's going to make people safer than having people move to Savage or Apple Valley. I mean, Minneapolis has some very serious safety challenges right now, and can't hire people to work on their public safety team. I mean, they can't hire police officers. They've got a contract for therapists to come out and help on behavioral health stuff, but most of the time when they call them, they're not available. So, suggesting that putting even more people there when they can't deal with what they've got going on right now, it just comes across as a very biased look at the region, and I don't think that is fair, because the communities that have been growing rapidly and would grow even more rapidly under dispersed vision are largely some of the safest communities that we have in the region, and have strong social support networks, and they have maybe not so much transit, but they're promoting biking and walking. And I'm an avid biker. I would not ride my bike in Minneapolis. I ride all over Dakota County and Scott County. I might ride in Bloomington along the river and stuff, but the traffic in Minneapolis that the bikes have to deal with scares me. I've been hit by a car before, and I don't really want that to happen again. Yes, there's a lot of things that are going on infrastructure-wise to try to promote biking and whatnot in the core, but the level of traffic makes it scary for most people. So having more development out in places that are building, I think, safer trail networks for biking and walking, I think some of these are in the wrong category in the opportunities, because they would actually do better in the dispersed rather than in the concentrated or compact vision.
Councilmember Delcart.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to try to summarize what I think I've been hearing today on this discussion. I think the framework of the way it was presented is constrained, and I think that is the challenge in itself. It didn't account for nuances and what staff probably realizes. And so, you look at the high growth, high compact, regardless of what compact it looks like, just the level of population growth has a huge demand for energy, transportation. And so I think maybe I will just go back to Councilmember Johnson's suggestion and say, maybe this information, the framework and the narrative and the way that was presented, I think created more confusion than necessary. So engaging early on with the stakeholders and just getting straight to the policy, I think maybe an easier digestible format than opportunities and challenges. Because any number of this, I think, is individualized on how you look at it. And some of the things that are reflected in opportunities could very well be a challenge on climate. Things that are reflected as a challenge under climate could very well be an opportunity. And I think it's the challenge of the framework rather than the work itself. So really want to thank both of you for all the work that went into it. But my two recommendations is to engage the stakeholders really early on and just get straight to the policy recommendations rather than this. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. That's my summary of today's discussion.
Councilmember Wolf, Councilmember Johnson, and Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate Councilmember Dolkar's comments. I think she hit the nail on the head. A lot of times when we're given background research, whatever, it helps us get focus and understand what we need to do. This feels like it's done kind of the opposite, like we're spending a lot of time on something that's not clarifying anything. So, I mean, I know you guys have worked really hard on it, and I don't want to waste your time or our time, but I don't feel like we're getting a lot of useful outcomes out of the whole scenario thing.
Councilmember Johnson.
So thank you, Councilmember Dolkar. That was good because it's helped solidify in my head what I've been spinning around here. I would also say, because I thought about this early on as we started into this, I think it all begins with values. And values are across the board for people from their backgrounds, their cultures, their beliefs, their familial status, the people that they relate with, the people they don't relate, all of where you work. Values come to people in different ways. And I can tell you, just as you read this as a person, and I have big cities with lots of population and all the infrastructure, but I have more far-flung communities that are still part of Met Council and they do the comp planning and all the things. But if they read this and they thought that they fit into one of those categories, and looking back at the map from 2 weeks ago, they'd be like, you gotta be kidding me. That's not really the message, so two parts. I don't want to send that message to stakeholders this early on in any way, and this is a public meeting, of course, and it's good because it's a process, right? Process is good. But to say that in some of these categories, there are no opportunities at all. I mean, some people, I like goods and services around me. I like having stuff close by. I am in a walkable neighborhood. It's very diverse. I am 5 minutes from my job. The most driving I do is to get Met Council and back because I don't have good transit to get here. But I also have communities that are, large lot. They are hobby farms. And they have septic, and there's some more of that maybe going in because they're still so far from the MUSA. So, and this is stuff that's been approved in our comp plans, and they would think that living on a hobby farm with some chickens and, being close to Buffalo where there's a hospital or West Health, I mean, people live because they think there are reasons of positive health, safety, and well-being in the community. Now, some people have to live where they live and they don't feel that way. That's a reality too. So I just want to be careful in how we roll this out. And I appreciate the hard work that is going into this. So I would just take to heart with all of our good intentions just some of the comments that we're giving you. And I think changing up the framework, as Councilmember Dolkar stated, maybe moving away from the challenges and opportunities or the positives and negatives, because to some group, a challenge could be their positive. It's all about values and the lens you look at something. I have folks that don't think going to the urban core is something they will ever do. I personally love going into Minneapolis and St. Paul. I have worked here. I have family that live in downtown Minneapolis. I'm not generally afraid, but I could be afraid out in Plymouth. Somebody is, given me the vibe, and I'm worried for my safety. It can happen anywhere, right? So, but I think it's really important that when communities start to look at this, they don't find themselves in a pot where they're like, gosh, what do we do with this? That's all I'm saying.
Councilmember Carter.
Again, with great value for everything that's being shared, and knowing we're getting toward the end and have been able to hear a lot and discuss a lot, I would say there's so much more that we need to do with this, of course. And as it is all beginning with our values and our dispositions, I think that we are going to be challenged to see ourselves in multiple different scenarios, if you will, or I should say from multiple different perspectives, to be on, the side of me as an individual, or me as a city, or me as the region. Those are all different places where we'll be, and our values will be reflected regardless of where we are. To start out, as we come back in these discussions, I do think we need to, because our responsibility is regional in nature, we need to have in front of us a bigger picture of our regional goals and the work that we're doing together. Certainly it will reflect our individual circumstances and needs, but we need to continually be focused on that regional vision and the work that we can do to achieve it, even to the extent that in each of these areas, as we look at the cross-cutting issues, we think about those goal statements, popping up, because we do see the areas, but we're not necessarily as focused together as we want to be on those goals. So I'm looking forward to, as Councilperson Dolker just stated, doing the work a little bit differently, also making certain that as we drive toward the policy, we're looking at the goals and maybe able to reflect a little differently. I wasn't here last year. I don't know if we've had the depth of conversation that I imagine those council members who have been here have had, but I'd love, additional opportunities beyond the onboarding to reflect together as an entire council back on our regional goals, and as we have our next discussions, to be in that space together in our heads. Okay? Thank you so much for the work you've done.
And Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I want to commend and thank you too, and the other staff for, I think this is a great start to the work that we do on a both technical and philosophical level. This is the reason we exist, is to try to manage future growth. And also, I want to note that Katelyn started as an intern for us. And so I want to thank and commend all the department heads who take on interns and foster their leadership and growth so that they come and stay and work for us, and we kind of foster the future workforce. So that's my last comment.
Councilmember Lee, when you raised your hand, I knew that you would come up with the appropriate remarks for us to conclude this. I want to thank everybody, especially Raya and Katelyn, but I also want to thank you all for weighing in the way you did and not letting me cut this conversation short. I think it was important for us to get through it, and I know that it means more work for you folks, but it was a good dialogue, and thank you.
Thank you.
And unless there's anything else, anyone? We are adjourned.
Thank you.